Finally, after 30 years, the war came to an end. A peace treaty was signed in the city of Münster in Westphalia. But the seeds of German angst had been sown. The 30 Years' War united the Germans in suffering, leaving behind a deep trauma and an exaggerated fear of threats from outside. This dangerous legacy remained rooted in German consciousness until well into the 20th century. The new order was determined here in this chamber in the town hall of Münster. The year was 1648. The event was the first International Peace Congress in history. Envoys of the European rulers came from far afield. Their goal was to ensure that the continent would never again see such a war. The signatories of the Peace of Westphalia agreed to divide up power in Central Europe. Germany, too, was to be split up. That was the price of peace in Europe. Never before in history had so many powers gathered to determine the fate of an entire continent. Their goal was to settle the sectarian conflicts and find a balance of power within Europe. To a certain extent, that worked. The era of religious wars came to an end. What a solemn atmosphere must have reigned here in the year 1648. I think you can still feel it today. I would like to have been a fly on the wall for these summit negotiations. The Peace of Westphalia formed a kind of constitution for the Germans' realm. The map was a patchwork of independent sovereign principalities, free imperial cities, and bishoprics. This was a far cry from the nation-states of Western Europe like England and France. Take the year 1714, for example, when the German Georg von Hanover was crowned King of England. He immediately had a coin minted. A half penny, with his face on one side. An early selfie, if you will. After all, England had a single currency. The German territories, by contrast, had about 200 different currencies. Proof that there was no central power here. As a result, new powers formed at the periphery. Brandenburg Prussia became a mighty kingdom. The monarch, Frederick the Great, wanted to take over Austria. He fancied his chances because Austria had a woman on the throne, the Habsburg ruler Maria Theresa. Both of them, Maria Theresa and Frederick, wanted to maintain control without being despots. For them, serving their own state was their highest duty. The Holy Roman Empire of the German nation took a back seat. The struggle with Maria Theresa became a bitter conflict over territory. In a series of wars, Frederick succeeded in seizing important territory from the Habsburgs. Prussia was at the height of its power, on an equal footing with Austria. Nowadays, it's hard to believe that the two neighbors, Maria Theresa and Frederick, never actually met. Neither Frederick the Great nor Maria Theresa cared much about German unity. This was an era of dynasties, not nations. That all changed when a new French leader came along, Napoleon Bonaparte, who wanted to subject all of Europe to his rule. He went to war against anyone who failed to take his side and provide him with soldiers. But without realizing it, he was laying the groundwork for German unity, one of the great ironies of history. What an image! Napoleon and his triumphant march through the Brandenburg Gate, which would later become the symbol of German unity. Of all people, it was a French emperor, the outstanding force of the century, whose conquests and reforms would push Germany into forming a nation. Of course, a growing sense of German patriotism had already taken hold in the 18th century, but the confrontation with Napoleon strengthened this feeling. More than anyone else until that point, Napoleon played a crucial role in bringing the Germans together, even though this unity only came about to get rid of the despised conqueror. Napoleon managed what no other German leader had accomplished. It's a historical paradox, the political awakening of the German nation from outside. On the right of the Rhine, Napoleon forged alliances with German princes as a counterweight to Prussia and Austria. The Holy Roman Empire of the German nation was no more. The famous crown was consigned to the scrap heap of history. Napoleon made himself emperor. He saw himself as the heir of Charlemagne and sought to become emperor of all of Europe. For much of the European continent, that meant war. And those wars continued until Napoleon got too greedy. He overdid it, and the conquered struck back. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, Prussia, Austria, and Russia joined forces to overthrow the French emperor. More than 500,000 soldiers went into battle. In what was seen as the awakening of the German nation, Napoleon was defeated. Vienna in September 1814. Kings and princes gathered to give Europe a new order and to stop the advance of forces unleashed by Napoleon. Napoleon had not just waged wars. He had passed progressive new laws that broadened people's horizons. At the Congress of Vienna, German patriots demanded freedom and unity. But the ruling forces wanted to cement their dynastic holdings. And that's what they did in the final act of the Congress of Vienna. They created the German Confederation, a loose association of 35 German princes and 4 free cities, all under the shadows of the powerful Prussia and Austria. But would the Germans be willing to accept these crumbs from the table? The winds of change were blowing. The struggle against Napoleon had demonstrated to the Germans how strong they could be when they joined forces in an alliance, a confederation, perhaps even a nation. Of course, the many little princes with their many little states hated the idea. But the idea of unification gained more and more traction. Rebellions flared up. A new movement began. It reached its pinnacle in 1832 with the Hambach Festival, at which 30,000 people gathered to demand unity and freedom. 16 years later, the tipping point was reached. In many German cities, people took to the barricades. The authorities responded with violence, but the people's demand for a constitution was so loud that it could no longer be ignored. It was the first attempt at democracy on German soil. The first freely elected parliament for all of Germany assembled at St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt in 1848. The legacy of the revolution in 1848 has long been a matter of debate. Many people have argued that the revolution was a failure because its calls for political unity and a national constitution were never achieved. But was it actually a failure? After all, bringing together hundreds of representatives from all German states in a single parliament was a historic achievement. There was a general election for a national assembly, which created a forum for discussion and debate. It was an attempt at national unity. Radicals, liberals, and conservatives from all parts of the German Confederation came together for meetings and debates. The Germans were moving closer and closer towards each other. The spirit of 1848 lived on. The fundamental rights formulated by the revolution later found their way into the German Constitution of Weimar and the basic law of the Federal Republic of Germany. But they still had a long road ahead of them. When Germany did finally unify under one state, it was anything but a democratic act. Nor was it a peaceful one. This time, the driving force behind unification was Prussia. And around this time, a special monument was erected in Bingen on the Rhine. I'm on my way to see a lady. She lives up there.
She's a hard woman to please, and thought about letting her know.
This lady behind me weighs 32 tons. Germania, as she is called, is no lightweight. Here at the Niederbad Denkmal, this iron-plated Amazon was installed as a symbol of the German national state, which was founded in 1871. Germania is also a queen of battles. So is the history of Germany mainly a history of battles? It almost seems that way. The man of the moment was Otto von Bismarck, and he settled the great questions of the time with blood and iron. Like the revolutionaries of 1848, he sought to unite the German territories. Not, however, through liberal ideals, but under the cosh and spiked helmets of Prussia. In 1870, a confrontation between Prussia and France was brewing. Bismarck seized the opportunity. The master tactician provoked France into declaring war. Just as under Otto and Napoleon, unity would be forged on the battlefield. Fire! France was defeated. Bismarck took advantage of his victory and pressed ahead with his plan to proclaim the united German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The Prussian king was made Kaiser. But Bismarck had to work hard behind the scenes. To the very end, the German princes resisted having the Prussian helmet thrust upon them. But finally, the job was done.
Es lebe seine Majestät! Kaiser Wilhelm!
It was unification from above, a fitting beginning for the German state, according to Prussian historians of the time. Bismarck's realm was no democracy. It was an alliance of princes. The people were not sovereign, but most welcomed unification. Public celebration was so fervent that it seemed as though the grateful citizens might be willing to forego democratic freedoms. And Bismarck's Reich created the template for a united Germany that would last for